or instead of taking pictures, I just pulled it up on my phone. By your own admission, even the most skeptical scholars in this field don't date these letters later than 68 AD. The Pauline epistles, yeah, they date them before. You're correct. They date them way before 68 AD. Yes, that's when they were written. Yeah, in like the 30s and 40s. Yeah, that's when they were written. The first half of the first century. Okay. There were no printing presses. Rome, alright. They had scribes in ancient Rome, right? Plus, this stuff got disseminated like crazy. And you had letters sent to Rome. You had letters sent to all over Greece, all over Asia Minor. And they were copied and sent out. Even things like Ephesians was probably known as Laodicean, letter to the Laodiceans, because it's meant to be copied and moved on. The amount of manuscripts of early stuff that we have shows that it was, they let anybody copy it. That's why there's many variants in it, mostly misspellings. But yeah, it's spread like wildfire. How long would it take for the Pauline epistles and the religion based on them to spread throughout the Roman Empire? Even if most of them were written earlier. Also, these were Paul's letters. He never met Jesus. Not the Gospels. Well, seeing that Armenia was first Christian, and Ireland, and the part that the Irish, the part of Pictland, which the Irish turned into Scotland, when the Dark Ages happened, they had no connection with the Roman Empire. They were never part of the Roman Empire. Christianity survived there. Started in Ethiopia. It spread like what? Not to mention the Visigoths and the Vandals, who were not part of the Catholic Church, had their own versions of the Bible. The Gospels are dated even later, after 70 CE. So even if some form of Christians existed at the time, they wouldn't have been based on the Gospels. Christianity is not based on the Gospels, it's based on the Church. But my challenge is, which non-Christian New Testament scholar, professor, who teaches at an Ivy League university dates the Gospel of Mark and its final form after AD 69. I put before AD 69. It should be after AD 69. No one. Especially if they're not Christian. Same way we can date Daniel is the same way we can date Mark. And when I say final Mark, I don't mean that whether it had a longer or shorter ending by a few verses. I'm talking about, you had that last third, which is the Passion narrative, and then you had the 2/3 that was tacked on. I think I counted immediately like 27 times in the first chapter. That Passion narrative, many scholars believe that was from the 30s. So, yeah. Mark was first. John might have been first, actually. People want to put John and the Apocalypse of John of Patmos. Wasn't the same John later, but the Apocalypse, since it's so anti-Pauline, very anti-Pauline work, was probably written alongside Paul. Paul wrote 7 letters that are attributed to him, and then you had the pastorals, which were countering the work of Paul and Thecla. All right. I don't see the contradiction. Can pre-gospel Christians be called Christians? Of course. The church existed before anything was written down. The church wrote, edited, and compiled, and then edited again the Bible. Right? You say perhaps. No, definitely. Pauline epistles, like I said, were written before the Gospels. Yeah, maybe before final Mark, but probably after the Passion. But also, you remember, we're talking about oral tradition here. Oral tradition was big then, but you don't need to rely on it. Yeah, so, okay, well, I'll bite. Yeah, Pauline epistles were written early. Like I said, they're written before the Gospels, so no need for the Romans to invent or disseminate anything. They still might have, but I wasn't addressing that. Marcion of Sinope, for example, lived in the 2nd century. 85 to 160. I don't think he was born that early, but whatever. And he formed his theology only from Paul's writings. According to him, God, Father of Jesus, was different from the nasty creator of the Old Testament. The New Testament, God was good. The Old Testament, everybody knows of Marcionism. Yeah, he was Docetus. He was the Docete. He hated Yahweh. Thought the Jewish God was either evil or stupid. The demiurge. Of course, he was branded a heretic. His movement could have been called Proto-Orthodox. His movement could have been called Proto-Orthodox or Gnostic Christian. Proto-Orthodox. No, it couldn't have been called Proto-Orthodox. Sorry, it was Marcionism. And there were a lot of Marcion bishops. What happened was he gave a large donation to the church at Rome. And when Bishop and elders at Rome found out what he believed, they said, "Here's your money back. Thanks, but no thanks." And he went and he started his own church. Not to mention that he took a razor to Paul's works and then forged 2 other works of Paul, and also took a razor to the Gospel of Luke. You had the Evangelion and the Epistolicon. And then you have ostsol. Looks like I was misunderstanding, but I read your posts as support for it. Well, I was trying to say that the evidence of the traditions that basic Jesus narrative that eventually ended up being written into the Christian canon existed long before the point Atwell asserts that the Romans invented the religion. The fundamental fact of the religion were in place. Even universally agreed upon theology wasn't yet established. My understanding is that the only influence the Romans had was via Roman believers in their attempt to understand and interpret the pre-existing traditions. I would disagree. I would say that the pastorals were a way of toning down Paul. It was a reaction against Paul and Thecla in a way of toning down asceticism. So you had a positive view of the household. That's why it has things like those who forbid marriage are of the Antichrist, stuff like that. So I would say the pastorals were not pro Imperial Rome, but pro tolerable to Roman society. They needed to be there. That's why I don't believe the pastorals were written by Paul at all. Not outright support for Atwell, but criticism against this attempted debunking in the video. We have taken into account the various versions of these so-called facts, alternative gospels, for example, Gnostics, Dead Sea Scrolls. The Dead Sea Scrolls have nothing to do with Christianity, right? It would, I shouldn't say that. They give us a glimpse of pre-Christian Judaism. Maybe this person was reading friggin' Dan Brown. Maybe it's Nag Hammadi, not the Dead Sea Scrolls. Before the Nicene Council established the official church dogma, you have no idea what the Council of Nicaea was about. What was the Council of Nicaea about? Because it had nothing to do with the Trinity. It had nothing to do with which books were in the Bible. You know what it had to do with? Besides what date Easter would be on? Is the relationship between the Logos and the Father. The difference was 1 iota. And it was about a 300-2 vote. You had Arius and Eusebius of Nicomedia on one side and everybody else on the other. I'll go to part 2. Because as for Fourdotsyt and ostsol, you guys aren't stupid. It's the stupidity of these people that really get me. So you guys I have some respect for. But this lunatic that's talking about the Dead Sea Scrolls being Gnostic Christian writings with Gospels, that's what really gets me. Especially when, like me, for the last 15 years, you've been reading and studying on a scholarly basis writings from 2nd century BC to the 9th century to AD 800. So when you come across YouTubers like this, it really gets your goat.